The elderly black woman adjusted her veteran's cap as the restaurant owner sneered. Despite his blatant racism, Dorothy Williams remained composed, her trained eyes missing nothing, especially not the young wife slipping something into the famous chef's meal. The Legacy was Charleston's crown jewel of fine dining, where reservations were booked months in advance and prices reflected the exclusivity. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths and polished silverware, while waitstaff in crisp uniforms glided between tables with practiced precision. Dorothy Williams sat alone at a small corner table, her 70-year-old frame straight as a ramrod despite her age. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple blue dress with a small Veterans Affairs pin on her collar, subtle, yet meaningful to those who recognized it. Her weathered hands rested calmly on the table, but her dark eyes missed nothing, scanning the room with a methodical precision that had once been her professional trademark. Richard Evans, the restaurant's owner, had barely concealed his displeasure when Dorothy arrived. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" he'd asked, eyeing her modest attire with obvious disdain. Even now, he was watching her from the host stand, whispering to a waiter and occasionally glancing in her direction with undisguised contempt. At the restaurant's prime table sat John Miller, the celebrated chef whose name adorned the establishment. At 58, his salt and pepper hair and commanding presence reflected decades of culinary excellence. Beside him sat his wife Sarah, at least 20 years his junior, her polished beauty a stark contrast to her husband's weathered appearance. Her diamond bracelet caught the light as she checked her phone, barely acknowledging John's attempts at conversation. The tension between them was palpable, even from across the room. Dorothy noticed how Sarah's smile never reached her eyes, how John's shoulders slumped slightly when she dismissed his comments. Years of intelligence training had taught Dorothy to read body language like others read books. There was something profoundly wrong in that marriage, something beyond the usual strains of restaurant ownership and age differences. As Dorothy sipped her water, she caught Richard's gaze again. His eyes narrowed before he turned away, making it clear she wasn't welcome. But Dorothy Williams hadn't survived Vietnam and decades in military intelligence by backing down from hostile environments. "Is everything satisfactory, ma'am?" The waiter's tone suggested he hoped otherwise. Dorothy looked up from her menu and smiled warmly. "Perfectly fine, thank you. I'd like the salmon, please." The waiter nodded curtly and took her menu without another word. As he walked away, Dorothy overheard Richard mutter, "Make sure her plate comes last. Maybe she'll get the hint." Dorothy's expression remained neutral, but her mind cataloged every slight, every microaggression. It wasn't the first time she'd faced racism, and at 70 years old, she doubted it would be the last. What troubled her more was watching the dynamic between John and Sarah Miller as their evening unfolded. "You've barely touched your wine," John said to Sarah, his voice carrying across the hushed restaurant. "I'm not in the mood," Sarah replied coldly. "Besides, shouldn't you be checking on the kitchen? That's why we're here, isn't it? To make sure everything's running smoothly without you." John sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I trust my staff. Tonight was supposed to be about us." Sarah's laugh lacked warmth. "There's always something more important than us, John. Always has been." Dorothy observed other diners, pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. The couple's discord provided entertainment with their meals. Meanwhile, Richard continued making rounds to every table except Dorothy's, offering personalized greetings and recommendations. When he finally approached her table, his smile was strained. "Is your meal acceptable?" he asked, not bothering to hide his impatience. "It hasn't arrived yet," Dorothy replied evenly. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps the Legacy isn't suited to your tastes. There's a soul food restaurant about 10 blocks south that might be more comfortable for you." A nearby diner gasped softly at the blatant racism. Dorothy maintained her composure, meeting Richard's gaze directly. "I've dined in embassies across 4 continents, Mr. Evans. I believe I can handle your menu just fine." Richard's face flushed. "Well, just keep to yourself. Some of our guests have complained about feeling uncomfortable." As he stalked away, Dorothy noticed Sarah Miller excusing herself from the table. With practiced subtlety, Dorothy tracked her movement toward the kitchen, noting how the young woman's demeanor shifted from bored disinterest to focused intensity. Something wasn't right, and decades of intelligence work had taught Dorothy to trust her instincts. Dorothy watched as Sarah slipped into the kitchen, moving with deliberate casualness that set off alarm bells in her trained mind. Years of counterintelligence had taught her to recognize when someone was trying too hard to appear normal. The young woman emerged minutes later, returning to her seat with a satisfied smile that hadn't been there before. When John's special dish arrived, a signature beef tenderloin that wasn't on the regular menu, Dorothy noticed Sarah's eyes tracking the plate with unusual intensity. The chef beamed as the waiter presented his meal with flourish, but Sarah's face betrayed something darker than spousal pride. "Your anniversary special, sir, prepared exactly as requested," the waiter announced. Dorothy's fork paused midway to her mouth. She observed Sarah leaning forward, her posture suddenly alert, watching John expectantly. It was the same anticipatory focus Dorothy had seen in field operatives waiting for an operation to execute. Placing her fork down silently, Dorothy employed the observation techniques that had saved countless lives during her career. She noticed a faint discoloration in the sauce surrounding John's steak. Almost imperceptible, but present nonetheless. She saw the slight tremor in Sarah's hand as she raised her water glass, the micro-expression of anxiety quickly masked by a practiced smile. Richard passed by Dorothy's table, stopping to glare down at her. "Is there a problem with your food?" he asked, his tone suggesting he hoped there was. "No problem at all," Dorothy replied calmly, never taking her eyes off the Miller table. "Then I'd appreciate if you stopped staring at our most important guests. It's making them uncomfortable." Dorothy met his gaze evenly. "Mr. Evans, sometimes observation is the difference between life and death." Richard scoffed. "Please, this isn't one of your little neighborhood dramas. This is fine dining." As he walked away, Dorothy saw John raise his fork to his mouth, Sarah's eyes widening slightly in anticipation. In that moment, Dorothy knew with absolute certainty what was happening. The same instinct that had detected poisons in ambassadors' meals during the Cold War was screaming warnings now. She had seconds to decide whether to act and risk further humiliation or remain silent. Dorothy's mind flashed back to Saigon 1971. She noticed the server's unusual behavior at a diplomatic function, spotted the telltale signs of tampered drinks. Her intervention had saved 3 generals, but earned her skepticism initially, until tests confirmed the presence of arsenic. "Trust your training," her commander had told her afterward. Better to be wrong and alive than right and dead. Now, decades later, sitting in a Charleston restaurant, that same certainty gripped her. Dorothy began to rise from her seat when Richard appeared, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "I think it's time for you to leave," he said quietly, his voice laced with threat. "You're disturbing our patrons." Dorothy remained calm, her eyes never leaving John Miller about to take his first bite. "Sir, you're making a mistake." "The mistake was letting you through the door," Richard hissed. "I won't ask again." 2 other diners, wealthy white couples, nodded in agreement with Richard, while a few others looked away uncomfortably. The weight of their collective judgment pressed down, a familiar burden she'd carried her entire life. Dorothy thought of remaining silent, of walking away with dignity. She could report her suspicions afterward, but by then it would be too late for John Miller. Military intelligence had taught her that moments of decision defined a person more than any medal or commendation. "Mr. Evans," she said firmly, removing his hand from her shoulder with surprising strength, "I've faced worse intimidation than yours in service to this country." Richard's face contorted with anger. "Security," he called out. "We need to remove someone." A burly man in a suit approached, and Dorothy recognized the stance of former military, another veteran working security. Their eyes met briefly, a flicker of recognition passing between them. Though they'd never met, Dorothy straightened to her full height, her decision made. "Young man," she addressed the security officer, "in about 10 seconds, that chef is going to consume something dangerous. You can help me stop it, or you can escort me out. Either way, I'm not staying silent." The security officer hesitated, sensing the conviction in her voice. In that brief window of uncertainty, Dorothy knew she had to act immediately. "Stop." Dorothy's voice cut through the restaurant's ambient noise like a command on a battlefield. "Chef Miller, don't eat that food." The entire restaurant froze. John Miller's fork hovered inches from his mouth as all eyes turned toward the elderly black woman, now striding purposefully toward the chef's table. Richard lunged after her. "Security! Get her out now." But Dorothy moved with unexpected agility, reaching John's table before anyone could intercept her. "Your wife put something in your food," she stated clearly, her voice calm but authoritative. "I watched her signal the kitchen staff during her visit earlier." Sarah's face drained of color before quickly composing itself into outraged innocence. "That's absurd. Richard, get this crazy woman out of here." John lowered his fork slowly, looking between his wife and Dorothy with confusion. "What are you talking about?" "This is outrageous," Richard sputtered, grabbing Dorothy's arm. "I apologize profusely, Chef Miller. This woman is clearly disturbed. I am Dorothy Williams, formerly Captain Williams, U.S. Military Intelligence Corps," she stated, not resisting Richard's grip, but not yielding to it either. "I specialize in threat assessment and counterintelligence for 27 years. I know what I saw." The security officer approached cautiously. "Sir, perhaps we should—" "Get her out!" Sarah shrieked, standing so abruptly her chair toppled backward. "She's ruining everything. She's just some senile old woman looking for attention." Dorothy remained composed. "Chef Miller, please examine your food carefully. Notice the slight discoloration around the edges, the faint bitter almond smell. These are hallmarks of certain toxins." The restaurant had gone completely silent. Patrons watched the unfolding drama, some recording with their phones. John Miller, perhaps responding to something in Dorothy's steady gaze, leaned down and cautiously sniffed his plate. His expression changed instantly. "Sarah?" His voice was barely audible. "What did you do?" Sarah's composure cracked. "Nothing. This is insane. You're listening to some random black grandmother over your own wife." The racial undertone wasn't lost on anyone. Murmurs rippled through the restaurant. Richard, realizing the situation was spiraling beyond control, attempted damage control. "Let's all calm down. Chef Miller, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Test the food," Dorothy suggested firmly. "The truth will speak for itself." John Miller's face hardened as he pushed the plate away. "I think that's an excellent idea." "This is ridiculous." Sarah's voice had taken on a shrill quality. "You're going to believe the accusations of her?" She gestured dismissively at Dorothy. John signaled to his sous chef, a young man who had emerged in the kitchen during the commotion. "Michael, take this plate back and—" Sarah lunged suddenly, grabbing the plate and attempting to dump its contents onto the floor, but the security officer's reflexes were quicker. He caught her wrist, stabilizing the plate. "I think everyone needs to calm down," he said firmly. "Let go of me." Sarah struggled against his grip. "This is assault. Richard, do something." Richard stood frozen, his business instincts warring with his prejudices. The scene was unfolding in front of wealthy patrons and several recording phones. Whatever happened next would be online within minutes. Dorothy spoke quietly, addressing the security officer. "Check her purse. If I'm right, you'll find what she used." "You have no right." Sarah clutched her designer handbag tightly to her chest. A waiter stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, I saw Mrs. Miller in the kitchen. She insisted on adding a special seasoning to your anniversary dish. Said it was a surprise." All eyes turned to the waiter, then back to Sarah, whose face had gone deathly pale. John's expression hardened. "Sarah, open the purse." "This is all a misunderstanding," she said, backing away. "That old woman is confused. She's making things up." Dorothy remained calm. "The longer you resist, Mrs. Miller, the more guilty you appear." Richard finally found his voice. "Perhaps we should take this somewhere private." "No," John interrupted firmly. "Whatever's happening, it happens right here. Sarah, the purse. Now." When Sarah made a sudden break for the door, the security officer moved to block her path. In the ensuing struggle, her purse fell, spilling its contents across the floor. Among the scattered items was a small amber vial with no label. John's face went ashen. "What is that, Sarah?" The restaurant held its collective breath as Sarah's composure finally shattered completely. "You were never supposed to find out," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It was supposed to look natural, like your heart just gave out." The admission sent shockwaves through the restaurant. As the security officer detained Sarah, John Miller stood motionless, devastation etched across his features. Dorothy stepped back, allowing the scene to unfold without further intervention. Richard Evans, seeing his restaurant's reputation imploding before his eyes, switched tactics with breathtaking speed. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. This unfortunate situation is now under control, thanks to the, helpful observation of our guest. Her name is Dorothy Williams," came a voice from across the restaurant. An older man in a veteran's cap approached, recognition in his eyes. "And unless I'm mistaken, you're looking at one of the most decorated intelligence officers from the Vietnam era." Dorothy's expression remained neutral, though something flickered in her eyes. The man continued, addressing the room. "Captain Williams here saved more American lives through her intelligence work than most combat units. They call her the Sentinel, because nothing escaped her notice." Richard's face paled as whispers spread through the restaurant. "Is that true?" John asked, looking at Dorothy with new eyes. She nodded slightly. "I served my country for nearly 3 decades, most of it classified. Old habits of observation die hard." The responding police officers treated Dorothy with immediate respect when the veteran identified himself as a former Marine who recognized her from a ceremony at the Pentagon years ago. "Ma'am, it's an honor," one officer said quietly. As Sarah was led away in handcuffs, John approached Dorothy, his hand shaking. "You saved my life. How can I ever thank you?" Before she could answer, Richard stepped forward awkwardly. "Captain Williams, I must apologize for my misunderstanding earlier. Had I known that I was a decorated veteran?" Dorothy interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "Would that have made me more deserving of basic human dignity, Mr. Evans?" An interesting perspective. Richard had no response, shame finally replacing his arrogance. The next hour passed in a blur of police statements and witness accounts. Dorothy provided her observations with the precision and clarity that had characterized her military career, methodically describing Sarah's movements and behavior without embellishment or emotion. Richard Evans had retreated to his office, emerging only when necessary and avoiding Dorothy's gaze. The restaurant had emptied of most diners, though a few remained, discussing the evening's dramatic events in hushed tones. "The substance in the vial appears to be digitalis," a police officer informed John. "In the dose she prepared, it would have caused cardiac arrest. Given your heart condition, it would have likely been attributed to natural causes." John nodded numbly, the betrayal still fresh. He approached Dorothy, who sat calmly at a table, sipping the tea someone had brought her. "Captain Williams," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I've spent my entire career trusting my instincts about ingredients, flavors, combinations, yet I completely missed what was happening in my own marriage." "How did you know?" Dorothy smiled gently. "Intelligence work isn't so different from cooking, Chef Miller. Both require attention to details others miss, recognizing patterns, and trusting your instincts when something doesn't taste quite right." John nodded slowly. "Richard's behavior toward you was unacceptable. I want you to know he no longer has a position at this restaurant." From across the room, Richard's head snapped up, but one look from John silenced any protest. "The legacy will close temporarily," John continued. "When we reopen, I hope you return as my guest of honor." Dorothy tilted her head thoughtfully. "Perhaps instead, you might consider hosting a monthly dinner for veterans from the VA hospital. Many of them rarely get to experience fine dining." John's expression softened. "Captain Williams, that's the beginning of an excellent idea." The story of the elderly black veteran who foiled a murder attempt at Charleston's most exclusive restaurant spread rapidly. Local news ran the headline, "Decorated intelligence officer saves chef's life after racial profiling incident." For Dorothy Williams, the attention was uncomfortable but necessary. Respect shouldn't depend on someone's rank or achievements, she told a reporter. But if my story helps people think twice before judging others based on appearance, then some good has come from it. The legacy reopened 3 months later with a new policy. The first Monday of every month was reserved for veterans, with transportation provided from local VA facilities. John Miller personally greeted each veteran, though he always saved a special welcome for Dorothy, who often brought along fellow intelligence veterans. The incident sparked conversations throughout Charleston about ageism, racism, and the invisible contributions of intelligence officers who couldn't speak about their service for decades. Richard Evans found himself blacklisted from Charleston's restaurant scene. His final public statement acknowledged, "I've learned a painful but necessary lesson about judging people by their appearance rather than their character. It cost me everything, as perhaps it should have." For Dorothy, the most meaningful outcome wasn't the recognition, but the reminder that vigilance and moral courage remain vital long after uniforms are put away. Have you ever misjudged someone based on appearance only to discover something remarkable about them later? Share your experiences in the comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more extraordinary true stories of courage and justice.